This is kind of an interesting time in my life. Interesting might not be the right word exactly. Bizarre, maybe. Bizarre feels a little bit more appropriate. You see, I've wanted to be a published author my entire life. And as of today, we are about a month out from my debut novel hitting shelves. But it almost didn't happen. Has there ever been anything you wanted that you were afraid to chase? Any dream that's gone deferred for fear of failure? I've struggled with imposter syndrome longer than I'd care to admit, but I have known since at least third grade that books would be my life. I was a really awkward kid. I was a new student in a small town that doesn't get a whole lot of new. I had these weird bangs. I have social anxiety, and while my classmates were nice, I didn't know how to bridge the gap between friendly and friends, and I was very lonely. But that's when I found libraries. They were my safe space. I used to go with my mom while she was working on her degree, and in the stacks of that college library, they had an amazing fairy tale section. Old school stuff. The Green Knight, Six Swans, The Willow Maiden. I wrapped myself in fairy tales like blankets. And those authors became my friends. I liked that I didn't have to introduce myself to an author for them to be able to speak to me. I liked that they could reach me on a level that nobody else could. They could show me truths about myself that no one else could possibly know, but they did. Those authors taught me how to be a better human, and I was obsessed with the idea of becoming one of them. I worked really hard in school, but I was also incredibly lucky. See, I remembered everything that I read, and I read everything. I got all A's, I did an unreasonable amount of extracurricular activities. I got into the University of Georgia. I did everything that I felt that I was supposed to do, and when it came time to choose my major, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I wanted to follow that creative writing program. I chose education instead. I know, but see, writing wasn't a practical choice. Not to me, anyway. See, I'd done the research, and there's no guarantee for writing. There's no for sure formula to follow that leads to publication. And that risk, even with the safety net of being 18 and in college, that risk was terrifying for one very important reason. I had never learned how to fail. I had that ex-gifted kid syndrome, you know. Academic things came really easy to me, and I didn't have a concept of a growth mindset for myself. So if I wasn't immediately great at something, then clearly I never would be. And if you're not familiar with a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, that's Carol Dweck's concept, and what it is a fixed mindset is the idea that we as people are unchangeable. So you have a set amount of intelligence, skills, talent, and there's no room for improvement. And the growth mindset would just be the opposite, that you as a person can grow with dedication, with practice, you can change and improve yourself. And if you've ever spent any time as a human being, it sounds pretty simple, right? But see, I didn't have that concept when I was making this important life decision. And, you know, all I had was this urge to not fail, and a love of books that I wanted to share with the world. So I became a media specialist, a fun one, I hope. And it is a really rewarding job. I get to work with kids and hopefully inspire their own reading journeys. And, you know, I don't think you can ask for much more than that in a career. Like something you enjoy and you also get to feel like you're making a difference. That is the dream. But it always felt like something was missing. About 5 years ago, I finally started to write again. And I mean really write, like setting down time to work on the craft and not just jotting down notions whenever they came to me. I almost had to. See, I moved to this amazingly creative place and became friends with sculptors and glassblowers and painters and photographers. There's something in the water in Americus, I think. And these people, these extraordinary friends of mine, they interweave creativity into their lives on a daily basis. It might not necessarily be what they do for a living, but more importantly, it's intrinsically part of who they are. And being surrounded by that made it easier to pick up my pen again. And with everything I'd learned as an educator, it made it so much easier to give myself permission to try. It turns out easier is not the same thing as easy. Understanding that I don't have to get everything right the first time and actually putting that into practice are two very different concepts. See, what I love most about writing is when it feels like it's flowing out of me. When it feels as easy as breathing. I think anybody who writes or creates, I think you can all kind of identify with that. There's kind of a euphoria that comes with it, but that feeling is really hard to chase. I get it maybe 1 out of every 10 times I sit down to write. And every other time it feels like work, like I have to drag the words out of me one by one. And when it feels like that, that's when that imposter syndrome, that's when all those doubts start to creep back in. Sorry. So it took me 2 years of sometimes effortless prose, but more often than not, it felt like Hemingway said, I was sitting down at my typewriter to bleed. But despite all the difficulties and despite all my doubts, I wrote a whole book, 90,000 words actually. But I still felt like I couldn't call myself an author. I sat on it for a while. I researched agents obsessively. I wrote a dozen different query letters, but I couldn't bring myself to send even one of them because I couldn't decide what was more terrifying, the idea that someone would read my query letter and not be interested, or that they'd read my query letter and want to see my sample pages. The idea made me nauseous, so I put that dream away again without even trying. And then at the tail end of 2019, right before the pandemic hit, I had my son. It was supposed to be difficult, at least, if not impossible, for me to have kids, so holding him for the first time felt miraculous. And I started thinking about what kind of mom I wanted to be and how I wanted him to see me. Would he be proud of his mom and everything she'd done in her life? I mean, was I proud of me? The answer to that question is mostly yes. Mostly. I am so proud of all the academic accomplishments I've achieved. I'm proud of the career that I've built and the difference that I feel like I'm making in my students' lives. But that abandoned manuscript on my hard drive really started to nag at me. It was enough of a push, that nagging. I wound up pitching my book in a contest on Twitter, and I was just as surprised as anyone else when that pitch caught the attention of a publisher. I sent them my manuscript and felt every agonizing second of the 10 days it took them to get back to me. That's not a long time in publishing. That's actually a really quick turnaround. It's still terrifying. But I felt every agonizing second of it. And when they got back to me, they offered me a publishing contract. And I was so excited, I couldn't stand myself. And when I called a friend of mine to ask if she would take a headshot for me, I still had trouble articulating why I needed one, because I still felt like I couldn't call myself an author. I went through 4 rounds of edits. I've seen my book cover. I've even been approached about the foreign translation rights. But I still feel like I can't call myself an author. That's the trouble with imposter syndrome, I guess. Imposter syndrome is defined as the persistent inability to recognize that one's success is legitimate or earned. Feels like every day someone's going to pull the rug out from underneath me and show me why I don't belong here, why I don't deserve this space. But here's what I learned through all those rounds of edits. I can't tell the difference in my writing on days when it feels like it's flowing out of me and my writing on the days where it feels like work. Let me put that another way. On the days where I feel no doubts, when I feel like I know exactly what I'm doing, my writing isn't any better than on the days where I feel like a fraud. So, anyway, lost my train of thought there. So I'm begging you, please don't be like me. Don't sit on it for 10 years. Don't wait to create. Your words are valued and valid and needed because they are all of those things to you. Thank you.